How's it going, everybody? It's the Dual Threat Podcast, your daily news source for all things sports. I'm your host, Jacob.
I'm Drew.
Welcome back to another video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. Really helps us out. The growth has been kind of lulling recently in the subscriber count, so we're trying to get that back up there. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter if you haven't already, at Dual Threat. And if you can't watch the video, you're just in the car driving or whatever, make sure to check us out on Spotify. Just search the Dual Threat Podcast and we'll show up. Without further ado, I say we get right into the video. This is our reaction and kind of our own rankings for this week in college football. So I think go ahead and take it away, Drew.
All right, at number 10, I've got Wisconsin. Didn't play for a few weeks, went out and destroyed a terrible Michigan team this year. They didn't play for a while, so I didn't have them in my top 10 last week. This week, I've got them in my top 10. They showed up. I had Miami at 10. They kind of had a close game with Virginia Tech, so I'm going to bump them up and put Wisconsin down in terms of numbers to 10, and that's where I've got Wisconsin. What about you?
Yeah, so I was, when I was making my list, I was kind of looking at the AP poll and just kind of taking into consideration what they do. I'm going to put Indiana at number 10. This might be a little controversial. They're number 9 in the AP poll. And I think they're a good team. I think all the top 10 teams are good teams. But when you look at it, the thing that was, I was pretty much between Wisconsin 9 or Indiana 9 and the other one 10. And when you look at their common game, Michigan, Indiana gave up 21 points to Michigan while only scoring like 38 or something, maybe less than that. And Wisconsin won 49-11. And I know Michigan's not a good team, but that head-to-head, that common game is a big teller of, in my opinion, the Wisconsin defense. And I think that's where Indiana lacks a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're very good offensively. Michael Penix Jr. is very good on at their quarterback, and their receivers are very good also. I just think when in my decision between choosing Wisconsin or Indiana at number 10, I think Wisconsin has a slight edge overall, even though they've only played 2 games and we've seen a limited sample size. So that's going to be my 10, and going into my 9, I think Wisconsin has a fairly solid defense. I mean, you look, they gave up 11 points to Michigan this week, and their first game they gave up 7 to Illinois. So, I mean, they've given up 18 points in 2 games, which is what a lot of Big 12 teams give up in a quarter. And so and that's kind of been Wisconsin's MO over the past few years. Good defense, good run game. And I think this year what makes them a little more dangerous than typically is they have a pretty good pass game. And Graham Mertz he's been playing great in his 2 games. He didn't have quite the 20 for 21 game against Michigan like he had against Illinois, but he still showed up and still played great. And I think that he's complementing their also very solid run game and their good defense pretty well. What about you? Who do you have at number 9?
So for number 9, I've got Indiana for all the reasons that you've stated. Indiana is a great football team. Their wide receivers are elite. I've talked about that in the past. The only reason why I have them above Wisconsin is just because of that sample size. There's only 2 games that Wisconsin has played. Yes, they played Michigan a little bit better, but we don't know how great of a team they actually are. I think this weekend with Ohio State and Indiana playing, that'll say a lot about these 2 teams. So really, this ranking doesn't really matter this week. It's really just depending on how well Indiana plays against Ohio State. If they play them kind of close, I think maybe they still deserve a top 10 spot. I just don't really know at this point. But what I do know is Indiana has played twice as many games as Wisconsin.
Right.
And so that's why I'm going to put them above them. Even though Wisconsin looks like a great football team, they did play Michigan better than Indiana did. But yeah, I just haven't seen enough of Wisconsin to put them above them. So
yeah, I think that's totally fair. And also, I didn't even realize this until right now. Saturday, December 5th, assuming nothing gets canceled, Wisconsin and Indiana play. So I guess that'll really be the teller. Like you said, Indiana plays Ohio State. So that might switch things up in the rankings, but that seems like a big game for both Indiana and Wisconsin fans, that week 7 game for them, I guess. So going in at number 7, I'm sorry, number 8. Got it switched around. I have BYU. I don't think again, kind of with 9-10, I think 7 and 8 are pretty interchangeable. I think Cincinnati and BYU, it feels like they're the exact same team this year. Both non-Power 5, both don't play any good teams, but both look really good against everybody they do play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Zach Wilson again, he looks very good. 2,500 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, only 2 picks. But again, their best wins against Boise State, who was 2-0, and they were ranked 22 or whatever it was. It's not really like we've been saying this all year. You can't really judge it based on who they've played so far. And I personally think them in Cincinnati. I kind of talked about this last week a little bit. I think that would be a great bowl game because I don't think you can put either of them in the playoff, even if they go undefeated. And if there's both of them are undefeated, put them against each other and see who's the best non-Power 5 team. But I don't think you can put them in the playoffs. So that's where I have BYU at number 8.
Yeah, going back to you saying they're interchangeable, I actually have Cincinnati at number 8. Just watching this past weekend, I watched them beat, I think it was East Carolina 55-17. And they were, usually when teams play bad teams like this, they'll put it on them until the fourth quarter, and then they'll be up by 40, and then they'll take off the gas and let it go off, and then kind of look like a closer game. Cincinnati didn't do that. They faked a punt when they were up by 35 and went down and scored with 2 minutes left in the game. And it's like you look at teams like Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, those kind of teams that when they play bad teams, they're usually already up 55-17 going into the fourth quarter, and then they just kind of stop. Cincinnati scores all fourth quarters. They go through all 4 quarters, and they just keep scoring. They never take the pedal off. I mean, I understand they're trying to get into the playoffs, but I don't think you can put them into the top 5, even though they're undefeated, just because they haven't really played anybody. I also was very impressed by Zach Wilson against Boise State. I thought that game would have been a lot closer than it was. They ended up winning by 30 or something like that, 51-17, actually. And yeah, they just looked dominant in that game. And the only person that you can really compare that to with Cincinnati was SMU. They won 42-13. But then again, SMU hasn't really played anybody, and they're no longer ranked. So it's hard. I think Cincinnati has a big game coming up this weekend against UCF. That'll say a lot. I think they might even get upset. I don't know. But yeah, I've got Cincinnati at 8, BYU at 7.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I have Cincinnati at 7. They kind of had their coach and the East Carolina coach had kind of a little discussion after the game. I don't know if you saw that. They were apparently people, I don't know if there was audio on it, but people are saying they think it's because they ran up the score.
Right.
And you look at that game, they scored with 10 seconds left on a 75-yard touchdown by their backup running back. I get being frustrated, just fall down, I guess. But at the same time, this guy doesn't see the field. He has 2 rushing attempts all season.
Yeah.
Let him score a big touchdown. I don't know.
I'm fine with that. I wasn't fine with the fake punt when you're up by 40 points. That was kind of ridiculous.
I agree with that. I definitely get where that's coming from and the frustration there. But I can see it either way. We talk about all the time. Jimbo Fisher for A&M doesn't like running up the score,
right.
And
I'm actually shocked AP has Florida below them, even though A&M doesn't run up that score. I guess they see the same things that we do, but
yeah. So I think 7 and 8 are good spots for Cincinnati. BYU doesn't really matter which one's where. Kind of 9 and 10, I think personally. Going into number 6. This I think it's gonna start getting a little spicy from here on up.
Let's get it.
Number 6, I have the Aggies. I have Texas A&M. We've talked about them a lot. We've said a lot of good things about them. And I personally believe they are a very good team, 100%. They should be contenders. But right now, I don't know if you can put them above Florida. And I say that because you look at the game that they played. It was 3 points at home, very close game, very just shootout, nonstop. Nobody could stop anybody except for that fumble at the very end. Both teams had a fumble. But you look at Florida yesterday, or this weekend, against Arkansas. put up 63 points. And again, I know it's Arkansas. Say what you want, whatever. Kyle Trask looks like the Heisman.
I've said that.
I know
I
this
agree
is
with you on
this
that.
is my scenario about talking about A&M, but Kyle Trask looks like the Heisman, and he looked like the Heisman without, I think, the best player in college football that's not a quarterback. Kyle Pitts did not play that game, and he had 356 yards and 6 touchdowns. And I just wonder, and I don't think Kellen Mond is anywhere near Kyle Trask,
Oh no.
of course, but I just wonder if you take a key player like that off of the Aggies, if they would be able to hang and if they would put up 63 on Arkansas like that. And again, we talked about they don't run up the score. I think it would be interesting. I personally think right now, especially, well, also the fact that A&M didn't play this week, I think right now, A&M 6, Florida 5. Again, very, very close. And also, I mean, you go fast forward a few weeks to the SEC championship, assuming Florida loses to Alabama, then obviously they jump behind them. But I personally think right now, Florida is looking like a better team especially on offense, because A&M has a way better defense. But offensively, I can't see a team that stops Florida.
See, I don't know about that. I mean, I'll go ahead and say my 6, and then I'll talk about what you said later. I've got Clemson at number 6. I look at Florida, I look at A&M, and I look at Clemson. They're both the one-loss teams that are in that 6 and above spot. And so you look at their losses. A&M's losses to Alabama, the number 1 team in the country. You look at Florida, their losses to number 4 A&M. So theirs is not as good of a loss as Clemson's against Notre Dame with that backup. But then you go look at the wins. Clemson does not have a good win this year. And I know they're a good team. I know they had their backups. But if you just look at their records, you look at the way they've played, they have not played a good team and beat them. They played Notre Dame. They played them close. They're a good team, but they lost. And I know they have their backup. I know that'll probably be a different outcome in the ACC championship. But for now, I have to put Clemson below Florida and A&M just because they don't have that big or that top 10 win like A&M does, or they don't have that win like Florida did with Georgia knocking them out of the top 10. So got to put Clemson at number 6. And then I'm going to put Florida at number 5, below A&M at number 4, just because going off what you said, I understand people's thought process about this, but my thing is A&M threw one time in the fourth quarter against Arkansas. They had 40 points at that point. They easily could have hung up 60 on them, I think, if they wanted to. People say it was against Arkansas, like as a bad thing. And this is where I'm going to agree with you. Arkansas has the second best defense in the SEC passing yards per game wise. So Kyle Trask putting up those kinds of numbers is very impressive, but I've got to put them at number 5 just because of that. A, the head-to-head, and B, I mean, you look at the way they played South Carolina and you look at the way Florida played South Carolina, they played better than them. And so it kind of cancels out with the whole Florida playing Arkansas better, even though A&M really didn't want to run up the score. But you say that to take off a key player out of A&M, and then maybe they won't look as good. But my thing is, half of A&M's wide receivers are injured or opted out. And so, I mean, you look at Chapman, he had a great game against Florida, and then he got injured. So I guess you could say that's kind of a key player getting injured. I understand if they didn't have Isaiah Spiller, they wouldn't be anywhere near the top 5 right now. But, I mean, then again, you know, that would be like saying if Florida doesn't have Kyle Trask, because those are really their key players on each team. So I'm going to keep A&M above Florida just because they got that head-to-head to win. If they played again, I don't know what would happen. Maybe Florida would win. Maybe A&M would win. I think it would still be a close game. I think a lot of Florida fans are saying it would be a blowout. I think a lot of A&M fans are saying it would be a blowout. I don't think that's true. I think it'd be close. But, I mean, I wouldn't even mind watching them play again if they were able to play somewhere. I don't care where, but I don't think that would happen. But I'm starting to see a little bit of a rival between those two teams, and I kind of like it. I kind of like those two teams being a rival because I love watching both of them for sure. So who do you have at 5 and 4? Sorry, I kind of jumped ahead there.
No, you're good. Yeah, so I mean, I kind of gave it away when I was talking about A&M at 6. I mean, Florida I have at 5. I do think that there is a case personally. I mean, A&M in Florida, I think they're very close to how Clemson looked against Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you could make a case like you're doing to put them above Clemson. I just think you can't discredit Clemson that much for having a backup. And you look at this reminded me kind of last year LSU versus Alabama. And again, it's LSU ended up being the national champions last year, but similar situation. Week 11, it was they played without Tua, and LSU won. Close game, it's like just neck and neck, super close. Bama drops to 4 from 2, and I can't see a scenario where Clemson drops more until they look more vulnerable with Trevor Lawrence, because at the end of the day, from here going forward, they're gonna have him, and I mean, I don't think you can discredit Clemson that much for their best player and probably the best player in the country not playing. And so I think that's why I think you put them at 4. But going back to Florida, I think there's a case for 4, 5, 6, just all the way up and down for Florida. I mean, they have looked. They had their week off because of COVID, 2 weeks or whatever because of COVID, and they have looked better than they did before, which is weird. And you'd think they'd get rusty, but it feels like they just use that time off to just get better and focus in on everything that they did wrong in that A&M week the week before. And to be fair, they've played a couple not great teams, Missouri being one of them, but I mean Georgia, they just came out, stomped Georgia, came out and stomped a decent Arkansas team, as we've talked about. I think Florida they're definitely the team to beat in the East right now, obviously, and I think they're getting pretty close to the team to beat in the SEC because, of course, Alabama, and I think you and I are both going to put them at number 1, but Florida looks so good, and again, their defense is not great, but I mean, we've seen what people have been able to do to Bama, like Ole Miss, and so I think that game is going to tell. I mean, obviously, that game's going to tell a lot about where both of those teams stand, and super excited that unless something crazy happens and they lose.
No, yeah, I agree with you, especially about the 2 weeks off thing. We know now that A&M is going to be off for 2 weeks. I think it's going to say a lot whenever they play LSU come rival weekend. COVID has really affected a lot this season. It's going to be hard. A lot of teams having to be sitting out for COVID reasons. It's going to be weird. Like if Wisconsin wins out, they're going to have less wins than Oregon if they win out. So who do you put into the playoffs? It's just kind of hard this year. I would not want to be the college football committee because either way they do it this year is going to make people really upset. But
absolutely.
So you said you had Clemson at number 4.
Correct.
I have Ohio State at number 3. They haven't really played anybody. I mean, but then again, really this top 10 is kind of basing off of last year's top 10 just because of it's really hard to say where people are because there was no non-conference games beforehand. So you can't really compare the two conferences. Really, the only thing that we can do right now is kind of count out the Big 12 since they lost to a bunch of Sun Pack teams at the beginning of the year. And then now they're all kind of the same, But, I'm going to have to put Ohio State at number 3. Haven't really played anybody, but have, destroyed everybody they've played. Kind of like Cincinnati and BYU. The only difference is they're going to play Indiana this week, and that's really going to show, where they're at in the season. So, I mean, really, it doesn't matter where you put Ohio State right now because next week, if they end up beating Indiana by a lot or even just a little, I think they have a spot in that top 4. So
unless I think the only way they don't get in is, I guess, if Wisconsin wins out because they would be 6-0 regular season with a win over Indiana in the regular season and then beating Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. So they'd be 7-0 with 2 very, very quality wins.
Right.
And so I think that would be more than enough to get them in. And I don't think they would put 2 Big Ten teams in realistically. Because I think if Wisconsin loses to Ohio State, no matter how close, they're not going to put a 5-1 or 6-1 team in. And so I think that the only chance really Ohio State doesn't have is if they lose a game. And even if they lose to Wisconsin, like if that game's close, I think there is at least some sort of decent chance that if they feel then that they should put Wisconsin in and no other teams are worthy, I guess, of being top 4, that they could put both of them in. I guess we'll just have to see how that shapes
hard
out.
because this year this is probably one of the first times ever that if a team loses in the conference championship, they still have that resume to be put in the playoffs. And, I've talked to you about this before. That has only happened one time in the history of the BCS / the college football playoffs. That was in 2003 with Oklahoma. They lost the conference championship, and then they still got put into that championship game / playoff. It's never happened in the playoffs. So people have been talking about if Florida beats Alabama, you put both of them in. And then if Notre Dame or if Clemson beats Notre Dame, you put both of them in or something. I don't know if they would do it twice in 1 year if they haven't done it at all in the past, but it is 2020. It's COVID season, so you never know. Things like that could happen. It's just kind of interesting to see how this college football playoffs is going to work out. I think if any year is going to provide that they should expand the playoffs, I think this year is probably, the number one suspect, but I don't really know if they should expand the playoffs, especially for this year, but because, if you look at it, it really looks like Alabama is just the greatest team in the country by far. But for number 2, who do you got?
All right. Well,
number 3. Sorry.
Yeah, I was about to say I didn't talk about number 3 yet. It's more of the same. Ohio State. They've looked good. They always look good, and so
Justin Fields like 400 yards a game or something.
Exactly,
like that.
and he looks like a Heisman quarterback. Their defense looks a little worse than normal. They usually, like last year with Chase Young, they had a very solid defense, and you haven't seen a whole lot of that this year. They gave up. They aren't giving up like 40, but they gave up 27 to Rutgers and
but
late game touchdowns and stuff. But even so, you look at.
And also there was that punt return where they threw it across the backwards pass. So that kind of stuff isn't going to happen.
You got to guard that.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff isn't going to happen against, Indiana or Wisconsin. But I agree with you, yeah.
Yeah, I think, Justin Fields through 3 games, he's averaging like 300-something yards per game. He has 11 touchdowns in 3 games. They have a pretty decent run game, kind of a double-headed monster with Master Teague and Trey Sermon. Both have around 200 rushing yards. And, we've seen great offense from Ohio State in recent memory. It is going to be interesting to see when they play Indiana how their defense is going to hold up against that, again, also very solid offense. And I think that'll be the first true test, and it looks like their only true test until the Big Ten championship, because they play Illinois, Michigan State, and Michigan, and none of those should have any. None of those should be close games at all. So, I think I can confidently put Ohio State at 3, and until they show me something to say that they shouldn't be, I think that's where they're going to stand. So number 2. We kind of alluded to it earlier, talking about Alabama at 1.
Okay.
I think we both have Notre Dame at 2. No, I'm not putting Notre Dame at 1. Ian Book has looked good recently. He didn't look great in a couple games leading up to the Clemson game, but then in that Clemson game, he looked pretty solid. They still are living by the ground game. This week against Boston College, Ian Book aired it out a lot. He had like 3 touchdowns to the same guy. But you look at in that Clemson game, even he only had 1 touchdown, and it was in double overtime. And it's Notre Dame is very ground heavy. That's what they want to do, is run the ball. Just going back to that Clemson game, they had over 200 yards rushing and 300 yards passing. So and even then they were down late and they had to pass to get it tied and get it to overtime. Or I guess they went ahead at the end, you just look at Ian Book has been kind of up and down passing, but these last couple games he's been very solid, and I think again, kind of like Ohio State at number 3 with just a better win. They deserve to be there, and until they show weakness against a bad team or just lose, they're not going to move. And kind of like we talked about Ohio State with that big game against Indiana, that was the Notre Dame Clemson game. they already had their big game, and until the ACC championship, where they probably are going to meet Clemson again, they should just be a cakewalk to 10-0.
Yeah, they've got North Carolina this weekend, which I wouldn't necessarily say is a cakewalk, but I mean, see, this is the difference between number 1 and number 2. You put Alabama against Boston College and North Carolina, they're beating them by 21 or more. You put Notre Dame against Boston College, they win by 10, sort of thing, and it's close until the fourth quarter. The game's over at halftime against Alabama. That's just how big of a jump there is this year. And that's why I'm excited to see Florida versus Alabama, because to me, right now at least, it looks like Florida is the best competition for Alabama in the SEC. The only problem is I can't rank them above A&M just because of that head-to-head win.
Yeah, that's fair.
And, I mean, if Alabama loses to Florida in the SEC championship, no doubt in my mind, Florida gets into the playoffs, as they deserve to. I mean, even though A&M did beat them, it was at home, it was by 3. And Florida is obviously the better team if they can beat a team that beat A&M by 20.
Right.
And so that's just kind of where I'm at right now. Alabama, again, week after week, just looks like just such a better team than everybody else. Their defense is not the best in the country, but it's good enough to hold teams down to where they're going to beat teams by 21 or more. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Keeping Notre Dame at 2, even though they did beat Boston College, which I thought would have been a closer game. It was still kind of a close game going to that fourth quarter. And I think if Alabama plays any of these teams, they're beating them by a lot more than 10. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, same thing about Bama. Mac Jones is playing out of his mind, and something we kind of touched on Wednesday. I kind of brought it up was their run game is a lot better than most other people's. I mean, you look at they have 2 rushers over 200 yards, Najee Harris over 700 yards. Like, you can tell they get up big early and then run the ball out, but they're so efficient at running the ball out. Najee Harris is averaging 5.8 yards per carry.
Well, and also if you look at it, going back to Florida, you take out their key player, look how they do. They're performing really well. You look at Waddle being injured.
Exactly.
They're still performing at the top of their game,
Right.
And so it's just crazy.
Yeah, I agree. I think no position is more valuable than quarterback, obviously. But even so, you take out like Garrett Wilson or somebody on Ohio State. I can't see a world where they perform the same. And Notre Dame, say you take out one of their good running backs or one of their good receivers, I don't think that they would be able to compete at the same level that they are. And then you look at Alabama, and you literally take out the best wide receiver in college football, and they're doing the exact same thing to teams that they did before, which we talk about all the time. It's the next man up mentality in Alabama, and it's been that for years. You look last year when Tua got hurt, Mac Jones stepped in, and he couldn't beat LSU, or did Tua play in that game?
He did.
He was just coming off of injury or something.
He was injured. He fumbled in the first half,
I remember
which
that.
really put them down in the game.
So he played in that game, but the Auburn game, that's what I was thinking of. The Auburn game was when he got his hip injury against Tennessee like the week before, and then Mac Jones came in and ended up losing. And so I think you look at the difference between last year and this year, and how Mac Jones has gotten a lot better, and how, like I was saying, the quarterback position is way more valuable than anything else, but you still lose a superstar receiver like Waddle, and it's like nothing changed. They haven't skipped a beat, and I can't see, unless they lose a game, I can't see anybody overtaking them as number 1.
No, yeah, I agree. And going back to taking out that elite player, I think if you look at number 2, Notre Dame, if you take out Ben Skowroski, whatever the heck his name is, it's number 11 for Notre Dame. He's gotten like maybe 3/4 of Ian Book's throwing touchdowns this year, including the 3 touchdowns from last week.
Correct.
If you take him off, I don't think Ian Book throws another touchdown this year. Like, it's just kind of where I'm at. If you watch what they do with him, he's like 6'6", 6'5". He just throws it up into double coverage, kind of like what Kyle Trask did with Kyle Pitts. Just throw it up in double coverage. He goes and gets it.
Right.
So a lot of people were thinking Kyle Trask is not really that good of a quarterback. Well, you take out Kyle Pitts, and he's still just putting it right in the pocket of where people need it. And I have not seen Ian Book throw a pass like that this year.
No.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think if Notre Dame takes out their key player at the wide receiver level, they're maybe not even a top 10 team. But you look at Florida and Alabama, it's just kind of like the SEC is just so top heavy this year. A lot of people say they're really down this year, but I just think they're a lot more top heavy this year than usual. And I think that top heavy looks better than all the other teams in the nation right now. But
I agree. I mean, we have there. Looking at the AP poll, there's 3 SEC teams in the top 6, and I agree they are pretty top heavy, but those top 3 teams are very, very good, and they're just absolutely stomping everybody they come up against. And going back to Notre Dame, Ben Skowronek. I don't know how to say his name. He's not even close to their leading receiver, actually. He's their 4th in receiving yards, but he has 5 touchdowns, and Ian Book has only thrown 11.
Yeah.
And so, like, you have a guy like Javon McKinley who has 414 receiving yards, which is almost double what Ben has, but he has no touchdowns. And you can't, just because you get a lot of yards and maybe yards after catch, you're not going to be a game changer like Ben is with his 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame's been doing that a lot recently. Like last year they had Chase Claypool, last few years really, and he was a little more of a all-around receiver than just a big threat, but at the same time, I mean, he was the same kind of thing. Throw it up to him, and he will come down with the ball, especially against whoever Notre Dame wanted to schedule when they weren't in a conference. But yeah, I think you take out their big players and they have issues, and you take out Jalen Waddle, you take out Najee Harris, and they still have a over 200-yard rusher in Brian Robinson, and he has a 4th of the carries. So of course he's not going to have as many yards as Najee Harris. And I think their next man up mentality, it is just wild compared to every other team.
Yeah, and so like just kind of comparing our our top 10 to the APs, and just saying Alabama is so much more above everybody else. It's crazy to me that one person voted for Ohio State to be number 1. That must have been LeBron or something. But and then you got somebody voting Notre Dame. I understand that they beat Clemson, but they also beat backups at Clemson. So, I'm sure after the ACC championship, I think everybody will probably vote Alabama number 1 if they end up winning. But it's just crazy to me how much more Alabama is better than every other team on the list.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Alabama has a top 5 win with A&M, winning by almost 30. They have a top 13 win against Georgia, who was number 4 at the time, I believe. Like, it's not, and it feels like every year people are like, oh, Alabama doesn't play anybody other than like 2 games a year, and it feels like they're doing the same thing this year until Auburn, I guess, so 3 games. But in a 10-game season, that's more than, like, there's not those 2 non-conference games that just don't mean anything, that they just kind of throw in there to fund the entire other team's football program for the year.
Yeah.
And I think they're just absolutely demolishing everybody that they play, and I can't see that stopping anytime soon.
And that's why I'm so impressed with Mac Jones and Kyle Trask, is because you look at we were watching the Florida game the other day, and they showed the stats of the first 5 games, how many touchdowns has these SEC quarterbacks thrown in the past, and it was like Joe Burrow 26, Tua 27, and then it was Kyle Trask 28. But that's not even counting the non-conference games that Tua and Joe Burrow had, that Kyle Trask had to play against SEC defenses, which I'll give you, they're not as good this year, but still, they're not, UTEP or something. Right. So
yeah, the only thing is in that regard necessarily would be, I mean, you look at Bama the last few years, they kind of don't play their starting quarterback in the 4th quarter.
That's true.
So Tua probably, I mean, LSU I don't think did that with Joe Burrow last year. But, I mean, you look at...
They did towards later in the season, I think.
Yeah, but in those non-conference games early, Bama, Tua probably could have had a couple more if they... I mean, you probably could have had a lot more, but I would argue Kyle Trask could also have a lot more if they just kept their foot on the gas and tried to score 80 points if they wanted to. So...
Especially against Georgia. I think they threw it like twice or something. They could have easily dropped a lot more on them.
Yeah, 100%. So I think it goes both ways. There are little hiccups to either one. And so, yeah, I think I mean, Kyle Trask having 28 passing touchdowns through the first 6 games of the season is nuts.
And also, Kyle Trask has a Wildcat quarterback behind
That's
him
true.
that runs in a few times as well. So he could have more touchdowns also
And those
that
plays
Tua
never-
didn't really have. But Tua also has Najee Harris, or had Najee Harris. And,
Right.
And, better run game than Florida did. So
Right.
it's kind of,
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it all kind of balances out, whether you're talking about a better run game or not playing the whole time or Wildcat quarterback or whatever. It feels like it does all kind of balance out. And at the end of the day, numbers are numbers, and he has more touchdowns through 6 games than a guy who got drafted number 5 overall. Probably would have
number
been
1 overall.
Oh, right, Joe Burrow, right. And Tua could have been the Heisman, because you look at that Bama LSU game last year, that really changed the whole course of the season for
Both
Alabama.
teams.
Because if Alabama wins that game and Tua is able to stay healthy, which is a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but if he's able to stay healthy, they're obviously making the playoff and LSU doesn't. And not discrediting LSU at all, they won that game fair and square, but it is interesting to see, because if Tua stays healthy and they win that game, he probably goes number 1 instead of Burrow. But either way, 2 top 5 picks, and Kyle Trask is on pace is breaking their records already, and it's going to be fun to watch these next couple weeks, because that dude is an animal.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy to me. I've looked at the Heisman watch list from ESPN, and last week they didn't even have Kyle Trask in the top 4, and that's just nuts to me. I mean, if Joe Burrow had these numbers, which he did last year at this point in the season, they're all over Joe Burrow.
Right.
And I don't see how you can't do the same thing with Kyle Trask. He is just absolutely dominating these SEC defenses, especially Georgia, which was considered to be the best defense in the country a few weeks back. And I know Mac Jones did the exact same thing kind of to Georgia's defense, but it's just crazy to me that neither Mac Jones or Kyle Trask is the top of this Heisman watch list, and it's actually Justin Fields through 2 games or 3 games. And so, yeah, I don't know. I would have Kyle Trask at the top. Then I would have Mac Jones second. I wouldn't even have Justin Fields up there until he played an actual good defense like Alabama did with Georgia, and like Florida did with Georgia and A&M, both teams.
Right. I mean, yeah, you looking at the stats in college football right now. Kyle Trask leads college football in touchdowns by far, 5 more than Sam Howell of UNC. He's 9th in passing yards, behind Shane Buechele from SMU, who has played 9 games. UCF's quarterback, who I think they've played 8 games or 9 games. Sam Howell, Zach Wilson, who's played 8 games, and Kyle Trask has played 6. He's about 600 yards behind the leader, and he's played 2 or 3 less games than everybody in front of him. And it's by the end of the season, I can only imagine, and on a per game basis, he's better than all these players. He has a top 5 completion percentage. His passer rating is also his passer rating is 3rd in the country. I mean, he only played 6 games. They had the COVID, they had their bye week. You look at how this is going to shape up, and I can only imagine he's going to be with Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields in New York, or I guess if they're doing it virtually, not in New York, but at that ceremony, because in my opinion, those are the 4 best players in the country, and it's really not that close. And those might be the 4 best teams in the country by the end of the season. So we'll just have to wait and find out.
Definitely. You got anything else? Are you ready to wrap it up?
I think that's it for me. Bama's at the top, and it's not that close.
No, as far as we can see, until probably the SEC championship, it'll probably stay that way.
Yep.
And even then, beyond then, it might stay the same. Well, thank y'all for coming out. Make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to comment as well if you have any differing opinions from us, or how you feel about the Heisman. If you got somebody else that we have overlooked, I mean, we've got Zach Wilson as well. That's up there. He's pretty good, but I don't know if he'll exactly be in the virtual New York with all those other players. But,
Right.
Just comment anything if you have a differing opinion from us. And make sure to check out our Twitter as well, at Dual Threat. Make sure to hit the notification bell on both Twitter and YouTube. Those both help us out tremendously. We're almost at that 100 sub mark, and that's huge. Thank you all so much for subbing.
Absolutely.
And I think that's it. Thank you all for coming.